So welcome to the Average Dad channel. So this is what I do. I have a lot of projects around the house. I'm a jack of all trades and master of none, basically. But what I'm trying to do here today, I'm actually kind of a COVID guitar player. So ever since the pandemic struck, I've been kind of trying to play the guitar. Of course, I'm terrible, but one side thing about playing the guitar is all of the equipment and technical aspects of it, which I really enjoy. So a while back my son had a really cheap guitar called a Darling Diva. I mean, this was really a cheap guitar. I think I spent like $100 on it. And I took it all apart and refinished it and put a new neck on it, all new electronics. Basically the only thing I saved was the body. So I have all these extra parts left over. I have an old neck, I have an old pick guard, a bunch of inexpensive pickups, and what I was thinking about doing was just creating a practice guitar. You know, those kind of really small, not foldable, but something that is kind of a travel guitar. You've seen those probably on the internet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take all the parts from the Darling Diva's guitar and make a cheap practice guitar that I can just kind of beat up on and throw around, and wherever I am I don't have to worry about scratching it or anything like that, just to practice anywhere I happen to be. So what I basically have done here is take 3 2x4s, which is crazy, but they're just 2x4s, and I've glued them together. And what's interesting about 2x4s is they're 1 3/4 inch thick, which is approximately a good thickness for a guitar body. So Fender guitar bodies are pretty close to that thickness. And what I've done is I've just taken the old pick guard off the Darling Diva guitar and I've just traced it out, and I've glued these 3 2x4s together with high glue, so it should give us a pretty good bond. And then what I'm going to do once I do that is kind of just cut around the pick guard and get my basic shape. And I don't want the guitar really to be any larger than the pick guard itself. I want the body to be as small as possible, so it'll just be like a really small body and a neck, and that's about it. And I'll still route out for the pickups and the controls, and then for the bridge I've just purchased a really small inexpensive tail mount bridge, and this bridge basically is a top through string mount, so I don't have to go through the body for the strings. The strings basically just feed right through the back of the bridge, and I'll just mount it as a top through. And I'm still going to try to really work this wood, even though this wood's ugly. I know it's low quality wood, but I can still fill it and work it and come up with a decent finish. And I'll show you what I did on the Darling Diva's guitar. I basically just saved the body itself, which was kind of a low quality body in itself, but I was able to put a fairly decent relic finish on it. So I'll show you that maybe towards the end of the video. But this is the first step, getting this clamped in. What I'm going to try to do eventually is just cut it out and then try to set the neck. And then once I get the neck set and mount it in, then I'll show you what I'm going to do next. So let me show you what I've done so far. So here's the guitar body. It's going to be a scaled down guitar body for the practice guitar, and there's some dimensions that you have to kind of know what you're doing before you do it. So the scale length on this guitar is 25.5 inches. That's the standard scale length for Fender. You know, Gibson 24 3/4. So this is 25.5. So I measured that out with the neck. I just kind of put the neck on and measured it out from the nut, just generally, not trying to be exact here. And it does put my bridge right about here. So here's the bridge that I bought for it. So it puts the bridge right there. And what I've done is I've kind of sketched it out. So the neck cavity is about, well, the body thickness is 1 3/4 inches, and the neck thickness, the neck width, I mean, is 2 3/16. That's the standard width. 5/8 5/8 inches deep, and it's 3 inches long. So we have all that written down on this board. I kind of sketched out where the pickups are going to go. Here's the route channels between the pickups. A little bit oversized hole for the pickups. I think the cavity for the pickups, probably between 5/8 and 3/4 inches. I could probably get away with 5/8 on this. But then the switch cavity, where the switch is, it's a little deeper, so I might have to go 1.5 inches to get the switch in there, because the switch is vertical and it's a little bit taller. So here's the other route channel here. You can see it. So the overall guitar is going to look, I sketched out the outside body line that I want to have for the guitar. And then I think what I'm going to do, I don't have professional tools here, but I do have like a little scroll saw. It's kind of like a Dremel. It's almost like a router, but it uses like a scroll blade. So I'm going to see if I can just route it out with that instrument. And then what I'll do is I'm going to cut out the shape with just a regular handheld scroll saw or reciprocating saw, that little saw that you hold in your hand. And I'll use a really aggressive blade, and I'll just try to cut it out by hand. I don't have a bandsaw here, so this hole saw will just have to work, hand saw. So I'm going to go and do that, and I'll be right back. So the word I was looking for, it was jigsaw. So it's a jigsaw, and this is just a rotary cutout saw. It's kind of like a router, but instead of having a router tip, it just has this scroll saw type tip. This is reciprocating in the fact that the blade moves up and down, but they just call it a jigsaw. So I'm just going to, I don't have professional tools here. I don't have a router right now. Being COVID, I don't really want to go out and buy a router at this point for this project. So I'm just going to try to plunge saw it and see if I can route it out with this. It's probably going to be a lot of work. And then for cutting out this part, I'm going to use the jigsaw, but I'll just use a really aggressive blade and see what we can do. So I'm back, and so now that I have the 3 2x4s glued together, I routed the body for the electronics and for the neck. Now remember, this is just 2x4, so we're going to have to fill this and really sand it. But I did cut this with a jigsaw, and then I didn't have a router, so I know the router cavities look pretty rough, but all I had was like a spiral saw, like for plunging into drywall. But I've got a wood bit, and I routed it out with that. And here it is with the pick guard, so it fits. Remember, this is just a practice guitar, so it's not the highest quality wood and things like that. Obviously, I'm building out of 2x4s, but it's like a mini guitar. It's just a neck and a small body, just a body big enough for the pick guard, and that's what it'll look like. So it looks pretty good. I mean, the route is rough. The route channel is rough, but you're not going to see that anyway. So it's starting to take form. But what I really want to do is I really want to put a nice finish on it. And in order to have a nice finish, I'm going to have to fill the wood grain and all the the seams between the 2x4s with wood glue. So what I'll do is I'll use not wood glue, but wood filler. So what I'll do with the wood filler is I'll just kind of dilute it and use it to fill in all the cracks and to fill in all of the wood grain, like the end grain and things like that. But I did make a couple mistakes when I was building this. After all, I'm just an average dad, right? I'm not a luthier. And so one thing is, I routed this a little bit too wide. So so I need to fill this back in. You can't see it, but the screw right here is going into nothing at this point. So I'm going to fix that. And then also, I sanded this a little bit too extreme. So I'm going to try to build that back. Now, I've watched a lot of luthiers on YouTube do this kind of work, and what you can basically do is you can use Titebond glue, and what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to glue and clamp a piece there and then reshape it. And then for the bottom, I worked a couple pieces, and I am going to put these pieces in here. I had them fitted, and I'm going to clamp them in and glue them, and then reshape them with my chisel. So just a couple minor problems, but I think once I actually fill this with the wood glue and fill all the grain of the wood, I sanded it pretty much, but there's a lot of grain here. Fill the grain and then the cracks from the 2x4, and then really sand it. I think I'll be able to get a really nice looking finish. So that's the next step. Now is putting body filler on the body itself. So this is just basically a premium wood filler. It's a water-based filler. So what I was able to do is water it down and paint it on, because I want to fill up all of the grain and imperfections. I mean, this, after all, this is just 2x4, so it's pretty rough wood. It's not anything high quality. So I want to fill in all the imperfections, all the seams in the wood, and so this is. So now I'm just kind of in the final sanding. Now, one thing is, I actually routed this out a little bit too close, and now the bolt on my pick guard is hanging into the cavity. So what I'm doing is putting some, building it back up a little bit here. So I'm gluing it back in with Titebond, and then I'll take my chisel and I'll just taper it and fill it in and blend it in. So you'll see that. I'll show you how to do that. So right now I just have it clamped and I'm waiting for it to dry. And I actually had to add a piece back in here too because I cut too much. So I sanded it too much right there. So I grafted this piece in. You can see it's perfectly fine. It's not a high stress area here. Now I'm just sanding it and trying to make everything smooth. So you can see a lot of this end grain is filled in. So I don't really, the next step after this would be the primer. That's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to prime it. But what I'm trying to do is just get it as absolutely as smooth and all the grain filled in as much as I possibly can. So what I'm trying to do now is I filled the body in with just regular wood filler, premium wood filler. It's a water-based filler, so I was able to water it down. I just used just regular water, watered it down, and then painted it on. Kind of a thick slurry, but just painted it on. And then I let it dry, and now I'm just trying to smooth everything out because after all, this is just 2x4s, and the wood's really low quality. It's very porous. It's a lot of imperfections. So what I'm trying to do is just kind of really smooth it out as much as I possibly can before I get ready for the primer coat. So the next coat would be a primer coat. Another thing too, just so you can see, I actually routed this out too far. And now my pick guard hole is kind of hanging into mid space here. So what I'm doing is just using some Titebond glue, and I'm building it back out once I build this back out, I can just use a chisel and I can just shape it and just blend it in. And you won't even be able to see it. It'll be under the pick guard, but I want the hole for the pick guard, the screw for the pick guard, to have something to drill into. And then also too, I sanded a little bit too much here. So I was just able to take another piece of wood and just clamp it into there, and then shape it with my my chisel. So you can see it looks pretty good. I mean, it's pretty much blended in, and it's not a high stress area. I mean, but I just want to make sure that all 4 of my bolts have plenty of meat to bolt into. So as you can see, that blends in pretty well. And now it's just a matter of really making sure everything is smooth before I start priming. And I have the basic shape of the body the way I want it. So now I'm just kind of, first I used a block and I just made sure that I had everything flat. And now I'm just kind of going around by hand and just kind of knocking down any high spots. If there's any low spots, I'm kind of blending the low spots in. And then what I'll do is I'll paint the route with shielding paint. So the next step is to let this dry, and then I'll shape it with the chisel. I'll show you that, and then try to get the neck and the bridge mounted on the guitar. Okay, what I want to do now is I want to place the bridge in the proper position. So I'm putting the neck in as best I think it should fit. It fits pretty evenly in the neck pocket. And what I'm going to do basically is put a straight edge down the neck and then draw a line, which I've done here, and then put a straight edge down the other side of the neck and draw another straight line, which I've done there, and that gives me a very good approximation where the bridge should go. So now that I have a good approximation where the bridge should go, one thing that they don't tell you on the internet, or when you're trying to find out this information, it's kind of hard to figure out, is that what you want to do is you want to set your saddles all the way forward and maybe back it off about 1/16 of an inch, so you have a little bit of play on the high E string, on the high E saddle. Because basically what it is the high E string will intonate at the 12th position at the scale length. So the scale length on this guitar is 25.5 inches. That's the scale length for most guitars. Fender, Les Paul is 24 3/4. But basically what it is, at the scale length, at 25.5 inches, the E string should intonate at that scale length. So basically all the other saddles will intonate somewhere longer than 25.5 inches. So all the other saddles are going to be slightly back, and the E string should be right at that scale length. So we want to have a little bit of play just in case we have to move forward a little bit on the E, but it's probably unlikely. So you just give it a little bit of couple extra threads, just in case you have to come forward. But that's kind of a little bit of information that seems to be elusive out there. That it's hard to find the answer to that. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure from behind the nut. In other words, we want to measure the back edge of the nut to the place where the string falls over the saddle. Why do we want to do that? Because that's the actual string length. The scale length, I mean. The scale length is actually, the string starts to vibrate. Okay? The scale length is the amount that the string vibrates. So the string starts to vibrate right here. Anything back behind the saddle, the string is not vibrating. So really, when you cut a nut, you're supposed to cut kind of at an angle this way. So the string touches the front edge of the back edge of the nut, and then stops vibrating and then slopes down from there. So the string should actually touch the nut, the highest point, right at the beginning of the nut. So that's where the string starts to vibrate. So that's the beginning of the scale length. And the string stops vibrating at the saddle, right where the string cascades over the saddle, right there, right in between those two adjustment screws is where the string starts to vibrate. So that's the other end of the scale length. So when you're measuring the scale length, you want to measure from that back edge of the nut all the way to where the string cascades. So that's 25.5 inches. So I'm going to not use this part of the tape measure. I'm going to start from the 1, from the back edge, and I'm going to measure 26.5 because I've lost an inch, right? So 26.5, which is right about there. Maybe move it up just a hair. I can also measure with this big ruler, which might be a little bit easier. So it stops right at the end. So that would be 25.5 inches would be right there. So that's 25.5 inches with the big ruler. I just want to double check it. That's it right there. So now what I want to do though is, well, I'm going to measure the other side too. So that's good right there. Now what I want to do is I want to make sure that the alignment of the strings on the neck is proper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a piece of thread and I'm going to put it on the nut on the high E slot, and I'm going to put it on where the string is going to hit the saddle, and I'm going to look at the alignment and make sure that the string is equidistant all the way down the neck on the high E side. It looks pretty good. Now I'm going to do the low E string, and I'm going to put it on the saddle and see if it's equidistant. And it looks a little bit like it could go this way just a little bit. So now I'm going to look at it again. You know what? My neck wasn't seated properly. Alright, so I want to make sure my neck is all the way up against the guitar body there. Let's try it again. So the low E string to the saddle. Looks good. And then the high E string to the saddle. Looks good. Looks pretty aligned. Let's check it again. It's equidistant from the edge of the neck. And then I just want to go ahead and measure scale length again. I think it can go forward just a hair. Scale length again. Make sure that neck stays 26.5. 26.5 right there. Scale length looks right. One more time with the string. Looks good there. Low E string. Looks good there. Now I'm going to mark those holes. Okay, now that those holes are marked, I'm going to measure it again. Still make sure it doesn't move. So measure it again. Still looks good. Still looks good. One more time on the scale length from the back of the nut towards the fretboard. 26.5, 25.5. Looks good right there. So now I'm just going ahead and drill those holes. So I've traced out all of the holes, and what I'm going to do now is just drill. Here are the screws for the bridge, so I just want to make sure that I don't drill any deeper than the length of the screw, and then use a bit that's actually smaller than the outer diameter of the threads of the screw. So I need 5 holes, and I want to make sure I get the bit right in the center of the hole. A brad point bit would probably work good here, but I don't have one. So I'm just going to go ahead and put the screws in. And I want to use that screwdriver. So I can get a full size one in there. Yeah, no problem. I'm going to tighten that up so much. Put the other one in. This is a top mount bridge, so the strings just string in through the back. You don't have to go through the body. Okay, now that it's screwed down, I just want to check it again now. That looks good. That looks good. Okay. I just want to measure the scale length again. Remember, between the edge of the nut that faces the fretboard, 25.5 inches to where the string cascades over the saddle, and 25.5 inches from where the string cascades over the saddle on the low E. So that's what it looks like. Here's the pick guard mounted in. That kind of gives you an idea what it's going to look like. Now the next part is, I actually want to try to get so where I can bolt the neck down. So in order to do that, what's interesting is this neck is, is being reused, so it already has holes in it, but the body itself does not. So, the quandary is what to do in this situation. And what I found to do, what I think would work, is what you could do is you could take the guitar bolts, that you would normally use, and I cut them off to about, the hole depth is 1/2 of an inch, so I went a little bit more than 1/2 an inch, and now we can screw these in. And they have pretty much the same threads as the threads that's in the hole. So you can even use the guitar bolts, and I'm just kind of like threading them in. Now what this does is it allows me to just go ahead and place the neck and then figure out where the holes need to be drilled. So there's other ways you could do this. If you have another guitar neck and the holes are already drilled, you can make a template with the existing holes, or you can do it this way. I thought this might be a good way to do it. I'm going to try to get those points back in there as far as I can. Try to get them back in there as far as I can. I'm just backing them in. And I want the neck to be all the way to this side of the pocket. And I'm just going to make sure it's all the way back into that side of the pocket. I'm just going to go ahead and press. And that left my 4 holes. So there's my hole. There's my other hole. My other hole. So that worked, and then you can just back these out, unscrew them, back them out, back them out. And I'm definitely not going to throw these away. I'll just keep these for the next time I may need them. Basically what I had to do was I cut them with a grinder, and then I had to touch up the end, get rid of the burr that was on the end. So I'll just go ahead and save these. I have an old nut here. Go ahead and save those. And just as a check, it's 2 inches. The holes should be 2 inches apart, which they are, and they should be 1.5 inches apart the other way. Which they are. So basically, the neck dimensions are 1.5 inches this way, and then 2 inches that way. So kind of gives you an idea. So that's what it looks like. You can see that. So my holes have been placed. Now, the dimension for these holes are, I believe it's 3/8. So I believe these are 1/8, and I think these are 3/8. I'll double check that. But the next thing I want to do now is I want to drill these holes. I just drilled 4 really small pilot holes, because actually I want to drill from this side because I don't want any tear out as my drill bit goes through the wood, and I want to make sure the holes are straight. So I started with a very fine bit. Now, one thing I said before that was incorrect is that the hole size in the body is 3/16, and the hole size in the neck is 1/8. So the screws can go easily through the body and then thread into the neck. So this is the body. The actual hole in the body is 3/16, and then 1/8 is smaller, is actually in the neck. So now I'm just going to enlarge these holes. I'm just going to happen to use a 1/8 bit, but this is just to enlarge the hole to get it up to the next size. So I'm actually using 3 different sizes. First, a pilot hole to get it started and make sure it's on the right path, and then I want to open it up a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead. I want to keep the body as flat as I possibly can, and I want to make sure that my drill is straight up, at all angles. Okay, now my hole size is 1/8. So now I'm going to get it up to the 3/16. So now I've got a 3/16 bit. Go ahead and enlarge them a little bit more. I'm just double checking my bit size. Three-sixteenths. Double checking. That's the way to get it up to the proper size without causing a problem. Now you can see that all my tear out from the drill going through the holes is on this side of the guitar and not on this side. So it was because my mounting bracket, when I'm working on the guitar, I need those holes. So I'm just going to go ahead and give it a quick just touch up on the sanding. Remember, this white stuff is filler. It's a wood filler. Off those burrs, those so got the guitar pretty smooth. So I'm going to go ahead and take off the bridge now. To put the first coat of primer on the body. So I have the grain filler on, so that should fill in all of the imperfections. I put some toothpicks in here just so the paint doesn't fill up those holes for the bridge. And I've got the guitar kind of mounted to this device in my vise, so it's not touching. So I'm going to use just some regular Bullseye primer. Shake it up a little bit. And I've used this before on guitars, it works fine. Probably going to leave this guitar white. So I might just even do what I've done before, which kind of looks nice on that other guitar that I have, the one that I kind of made it look like a relic guitar, is I use the primer and then I just put polyurethane over top of the primer to give it a glossy look. And I didn't even actually put any white paint on. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a nice light coat on. I'm actually going to paint the route too. I'm going to go ahead and do that first. Probably going to put the shielding paint inside the routing cavity, but I just like the route to look good also. I mean, it's a pretty rough looking route because I actually didn't have a router. I had to do it with other tools, as you may know. So I'm just going to go ahead and paint it. This is the piece I had to add on right there. You can hardly even tell that it's been grafted on there. Just used I glued it in and then just used a chisel to shape it. I'm just going to give it a nice light coat on the top of the guitar. The route chamber, I can give it a little bit heavier, it's fine. It makes it look a little bit nicer. I tried to fill it and sand it a little bit, but I mean, you're never going to see it, so hopefully the primer will fill in a lot of the leftover imperfections. And help fill in the wood grain. And then once I'm done with this, I'll probably give it a quick sand, give it a few more coats of primer, keep sanding with, probably start with 800 grit sandpaper and then probably stay at around 600 to 800, probably maybe start with 600, move to 800. Now when I start putting the polyurethane on, I'll probably go from 800 to 1200 for the final step. So just go ahead and give it a nice light coat so it'll dry and fill in all the leftover grain, the porosity of the wood. Remember this is just 2x4s out of the garage. So just 3 2x4s glued together out of the garage. So I mean, you can't really expect to have any wood grain or anything like that showing. It's going to have to we're going to have to cover up the wood completely. I'm just going to go ahead and move my positioner here. Paint the edges. Go ahead and paint the edge. I mean, the end grain is here, so I want to try to get it on the edges here as thick as possible. I mean, if I have any runs or any thick spots, I mean, this is just primer. I can just go ahead and level it out and sand it down. It's not vital, but I want to make sure it's thick enough because I want all that end grain filled. I don't want to be able to see it. I want the guitar to look like plastic when I'm done. I'll go ahead and move this again. got this side. I think I got that side. And you got a nice thick coat on the back. Remember, on the back I had those two seams where the 2x4s were glued together. You know, I didn't have a joiner where I was able to make perfect, you know, joints, so I had to, you know, just fill those, which is fine. I mean, this is just a practice guitar. This is just to knock around, beat up, throw in the trunk, not have to worry about. That's all we're doing here. This is not meant to be anything more than that. You know, before I even sand, I think I might just put another thin coat on later after this. So what I did to this point is I put a couple coats of primer on the guitar, and then I put a coat of regular white on, latex paint. I actually brushed it on, I didn't spray it on. So I wanted to see how that would work. I mean, spraying just makes such a mess, and I wanted to see if I could just brush it on. But when you brush it on, you know, you really have to try to smooth the paint out afterwards because you have brush strokes and things like that. So what I'm trying to do is just wet sand here. So I just got to have some water with a little bit of soap in there and I'm just trying to smooth the paint out and see if I can get it smooth. If I can get it smooth this way, then I'll just put the color on with a brush and smooth it out, and then I'll spray on some clear lacquer, a few coats of clear lacquer. That I'll actually spray on, and then I'll just keep working that smooth and see how glossy I can get the guitar to look. So just an update on the practice guitar. So what I've been doing is I put all of the white on. I actually brushed the white on, and you know, it's a little bit imperfect. One thing I was really able to do to smooth out the white finish though was to just water the paint down just a hair, just a little tiny bit of water in the paint, just thin the paint out just enough to where when I put it down, the brush strokes disappeared. So in other words, if you put the paint down thick, the brush strokes kind of stay there and they don't go away. But if you just water it down just a hair, it just gives it a little bit of smoothness, and after you brush it on, the brush strokes kind of disappear. And then after I put the white down, I would wet sand it with 600 to 800 grit sandpaper to get the white as smooth as I can. And now what I'm doing is I'm putting down clear lacquer. This is Minwax clear lacquer. And amazingly, what you can kind of do with the lacquer is put it down, and then I'm wet sanding it with 1200 grit sandpaper. 1200, really almost like polishing it. So I'm putting down the lacquer, and then I'm wet sanding with the 1200, putting down another lacquer coat, wet sanding with the 1200, putting down another lacquer coat. And as you can see, I'm really able to smooth out the look of the finish just by placing the lacquer down, which is the clear, and then just trying to level it by wet sanding it with the 1200. And then here you can see the other side of the guitar. So it's really starting to, the finish is actually starting to really look smooth just by wet sanding in between each clear coat. So it's really starting to come along. Now remember, this is just a practice guitar, so I'm going to kind of beat it up and throw it around anyway probably, but I'm trying to get as nice a finish on there as I can, and you can see the clear is really starting to take shape. So after that, one thing I'm really kind of nervous about though is I have to drill a hole for the pickup, and I've already got this thing finished, so I'm a little bit worried about drilling a hole for the pickup. But the pickup is on order. The jack, I mean, not the pickup, the jack input is on order. So I really don't want to drill it until I can actually look at the jack. I think 7/8 of an inch, 3/4 to 7/8 of an inch is probably the proper hole diameter for the jack. But I actually want to have the jack in my hand and measure it before I try to drill the hole. I'm thinking about, I'd like to put the jack here, but I'm starting to think maybe, you know, putting the jack over here might be a good idea. Not sure exactly where I want to put it yet, but I'm a little bit nervous about drilling that hole, so we'll see how that goes. But still working on the finish. I just put one more coat of lacquer on this thing, and I want to let that dry, and then I'm going to wet sand it again, or maybe I'll even go to a polishing compound. So even less of a grit, some type of polishing compound to smooth out that last coat of lacquer, and then once I do that, then I'll wax it and put like a coat of wax on there. So I'll stop there for now. So what I've done at this point, the black inside the route is just a conductive paint, which is designed to be a shield. So it's shielding paint basically. And the ground for the pick guard will be underneath the bridge. So what I have now is the pick guard, and I'm going to wire it into the bridge with a grounding wire and the jack. So what I've done also too is I've drilled a 7/8 inch hole for the jack. I don't know if you can see it here. It's a 7/8 inch hole, and it's about, the depth on that is, I'll tell you exactly, about 1.25 inches deep. So that gives us enough clearance for the jack, and then also when you plug the jack into the when you plug the actual guitar jack into this, it protrudes a little bit past the contact. So about 1.25 inches is about right. So that fits right in there. What I did too was this was curved, so I had to flatten it out because I don't want to put anything on this side of the guitar. Remember, this is just a practice guitar, so I don't want anything here that's going to rest against my leg. So I wanted to put it on this side. So this part of the guitar is flat, so I had to flatten this out. All I did really basically was put something over this to protect the finish, and then just kind of tap it with a hammer, and it's perfectly flat. So I have these marked. The wire with the black stripe on it is the ground wire, and the other wire is the lead wire. And so this is the lead, which corresponds to this terminal, and this is the ground, which corresponds to that terminal. So I'll just go ahead and solder the lead onto here. Get my soldering gun heated up, and I'll solder the ground wire here. I'm sorry, got it backwards. This is the lead wire. This is the main conductor. And this is the ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place a glob of solder right in that hole, in each of these holes, and then once the glob is set there, I'm just going to reheat it, and I'm just going to stick these right in there and just let it solidify. So I'm just going to stop the camera here and go ahead and do that, and I'll be right back. So at this point I have the two leads soldered on. Positive lead is to this terminal, and then the ground is on the other side. And I'm just going to kind of pull the wires back, make sure everything seats in there properly, and go ahead and put the screws in. show you what that looks like. Hopefully you can see that. Then I'm just going to go ahead and work on getting the pick guard down. Now one thing, this is the ground for the bridge. What I'm going to do on this is just strip it back, and I'm going to strip quite a bit back. And then what I'll do is I'll just fan it out under the bridge. Maybe I'll just go this way, just fan it out, and then just set the bridge right on top of that, and that'll make a ground. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I've already set the bridge in the right position, 25.5 inches to the high E saddle. There we go. There we go. So I'm just going to go ahead and tuck these wires in over here. I'm just going to go ahead and put like a little piece of tape here. Could use a little tiny tie wrap, but this will be fine. I'm just going to try to move it out of the over there, that part of the cavity, as far as possible. And well, it's starting to come together. Remember, this is a practice guitar, so it's scaled down in size. It's kind of like a travel guitar. So I can just kind of take it with me wherever I go and not have to worry too much about it. You know what, I'm going to loosen these up just until I get it adjusted, just in case I have to move it a little bit. Make it move it a little bit. It's pretty tight. Seems like it's a little crooked, but it shouldn't be. I'll try to set it there. Push this forward just a hair. Let's leave it there for now. Okay, now I'm just going to go ahead and pre-drill all these holes with a little tiny bit and just go ahead and start sinking these down. So this is my end of the build. Put the pick guard on, put the strings on, tuners back on, string tree. Here's what it looks like. It's a scaled down small body practice guitar, something I can just throw in the trunk or take with me wherever I want to go. So I set the action at about 1.5 millimeters on the low string and about 1 1/4 millimeters on the high string. And the nut's set pretty well. The action's pretty close to that, maybe a tad smaller, closer to the nut, which is fine. Action's a little low. I might actually raise it a little bit, see how it plays. But it intonates pretty well. The low E string is, the saddle has to be back pretty far, and the high E saddle did intonate right at about 25.5 inches scale length. I had to lengthen the high E string just a hair, but not much. So looks like it's looking at the tuner. Everything looks like it's pretty good as far as intonation. Bring the E up just a hair. So there's my guitar. I built it from 3 pieces, 3 2x4s. Built from 3 2x4s and just a bunch of spare parts that I had laying around. So